But it was the first time that I saw it drawn in a Venn diagram form, which is drawn by National Center for Transgender Equality. And the three circles are policy, public education, and direct services. So policy is basically changing laws and legislations, right? It's something that is a long-term solution. You want something that is in law such that it will be forever in law until somebody challenges it. Public education is what they call the changing hearts and minds, right? Combating discrimination and stigma. And then lastly, public education is to create lasting effect. So you can't have policy changes without public education, because then it fails to reach out to the ground. And then the last aspect of activism is direct services. So these are serving the community, meeting the needs of the community, alleviating the problems and some of the challenges that the community faces right now, before any of the policy changes happens, right? So we talk about shelters and homes, counseling services, support groups, community centers, community events, harm reduction services, and peer supported education, for example. Let me go back to public education. So some examples we always know in the form of art, literature, theater. So expression and storytelling, right? You want to tell the story. And then there's classic education, which is going in and teaching about the difference between sex and gender and sexuality, teaching about LGBT history in schools, for example, and teaching, basically, generally raising awareness about the different concepts. There's also naming and shaming. So the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is somewhere in here, they do identify hate groups, right? And they would list them and tell people, and they prove to people why they are considered a hate group, and so that people know that these are not good people. But another form of public education we talked about coming out. That's one. And the other, celebrity. So obviously in the US right now, all the organizations we've talked to have Laverne Cox on their mouths. Jeanette Mock as well, but lesser known than Laverne Cox. And policy, we're talking about building our case, making position papers, meaningful dialogues with decision makers, reports, and political lobbying. So I've kind of described the each circle, but why I became really fascinated with this Venn diagram, and it was only through preparing for this session that I finally understood why they are intersecting with each other, was to see the interdependence between each of these aspects of activism. Right? To give you just a very quick example, so something that I'm hoping that you would bring home and then kind of work it out yourself, or do it during the workshop later, which is policy needs evidence, right? If you want to build a case, you need evidence. And where do you get evidence from? You get it from direct services. Right? Direct services being on the ground, they know the people, they know the issues, and they collate data, and that's when you can build a case for policy changes. But the other way works as well. You can't have direct services without working on policy changes, because then you'll always be working on direct services without making any permanent change. So you become this self-fulfilling machine, just keep doing things, right? And so direct services and public education. I have 10 minutes left. Damn it!
You can do it.
I can do it. Okay, so direct services and public education is kind of the whole point of giving a voice to, right? So you know the ground and you want people to speak up, so you do public education. There's a really good example, not from the LGBT community, which is the Red Umbrella Project. It's a sex worker community, but what they do is that they run writing workshops for sex workers so that sex workers can write their own stuff. Okay, so I think the rest of this thing is going to be a bit messy, so just take whatever you can take. One thing I want to point out about the system in America and the United States is that the judiciary is absolutely independent. Right? There are no fears of political repercussions. Federal judges are elected for life. Right? So you don't have to be afraid that if you make the wrong judgment, then you'll be fired from your job. Okay, so they're immune to all these things. So some of the questions that we should ask is whether culture has to change first or lawsuits have to change first. Yes?
You're saying no fear of political repercussions, but the actual voting in of the judges is extremely political.
Yes, right. So there is a process process where you have the nomination process, and the president is the one who nominates, and then it goes on to Congress, and Congress fights it out, and then decides who gets to eventually sit on that chair. Yes, so this is where the political lobbying is very important as well, which I kind of skipped over because I didn't know where it fit in. No, yeah, I think this is really important, but I just didn't know how to fit it into my narrative. In the US, I don't know how people know about the elections there. I only know this much, but I'm going to tell you that this much that I know. In the primaries, which is the first stage, when candidates stand up and say, I'm going to stand as an electoral candidate, they do not seek permission from the party to be a candidate of that party. So say I'm going to stand for elections. I'm going to come up and I'm saying I'm a Democrat. And the Democratic Party, I don't have to seek permission from the Democratic Party. I just come out and say I'm a Democrat. I choose this brand for myself. And then I will go to the ground and I start talking to people. One thing that this consultant guy pointed out that was very interesting for me was that in the US, if you're standing as a candidate and you go around telling people that you have 5 PhDs, people are not going to vote for you. Right? The moment you say you have a PhD, people are just going to like, yeah, fuck you. Why? Because the expert, people don't want somebody who claims to be an expert. People want somebody who would listen, somebody who acknowledges that NGOs and activists are the experts in the issues and not the politicians. So the politicians, when they say they are PhD holders, it's just this arrogant bastard who doesn't want to listen, right? So, yeah, in the US you cannot say you have a PhD, or at best don't have one, and just go down and listen to people talk. So, I don't know where I am now. No, it's okay. It's very good. My point is, I forgot what's my point.
Vanessa?
Yes?
Maybe I just come in and just help you out.
Please.
I think Homer is correct is that when the judges or supporters are, the Supreme Court of America are announced, of course it's the president who chooses, but it is Congress who says, yeah, okay, we're going to take him. So because of that, Congress, which as you know is mostly Republican at the moment, tends to be in antagonism with the Democratic White House. So it's not as simple as they are independent. So it is a very political decision, and a lot of the judges who do go in are politicized themselves. Their views are politicized. The kind of rulings that they made before are politicized as well. I think her point, what we can take from this is that there's a theory versus practice, and theoretically, yes, it is kind of really independent. In practice, just like it is in most things, it differs a little bit or sometimes a lot from theory. But I think it doesn't, the point of Vanessa including this was for us to think about the difference between our legal justice system and America's, and let's not be sidetracked by how it is different in practice. For us as well, theory and practice differs very much. So let's just use what we know so far to move ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much. But the point that I am more comfortable making, so all that is really good, but I'm not an expert at it at all, really goes back to the whole Venn diagram thing, right? So we have culture versus lawsuits. Which should come first? Right? So we have policy versus public education. Which should come first? So what I found fascinating about the Venn diagram is that we do not actually need to make that distinction. There can be different aspects of activism that can go hand in hand simultaneously. Which I wanted to bring to another point, and I'm just going to go everywhere now, just to finish. So there is another, oh, it's hanging, very fun. There is another, this is Alabama Pride, by the way. So I went to Alabama and it was fascinating because obviously super Christian, buckle of the Bible Belt state. And they have this really humble, really cute Pride Festival in this hall that has no aircon, there was just fans, no stage, lightings were makeshift lightings. Yeah, and it was just a really humble affair. Yeah, okay. My other point that I really wanted to talk about was this whole model of coming out. So one thing that was pretty much everyone in the NGOs that I've met at least agree on is that coming out is the first and foremost most important thing that has led LGBT, that has moved the LGBT movement to where it is right now. And obviously we know that it's an extremely problematic model. We know that there's some people who cannot afford to come out and that there are people who do not want to come out. And either way, yeah, okay. We shouldn't force people to come out. So the Spirit of the Cross was one of the churches that we met in Alabama, and it's basically an LGBT church, LGBT congregation, gay pastor. And he says that coming out means that there's a phase, and that coming out means that you're not like those gay people in New York City. But he also says that another thing that moved the whole LGBT movement forward was that there was a good scholarship on the Bible, and Pope Francis is of course instrumental of that. But why I'm talking about coming out is again going back to the Venn diagram. Let me talk about Casa Ruby. So Casa Ruby is a transgender sex worker community center in the District of Columbia. It's this really humble space, underground. Casa Ruby is this Latina trans sex worker, and she basically started this whole community center. And she says that not everyone has to be out and proud, sort of understanding the community. She cannot force people to come out and say that, to go out and say, look, this is my story and this is my rights that I want, that has been taken away from me. So she says that just get everyone to contribute in ways that they can. So in the forms of specialized volunteers or in stealth volunteers, something that we can, I definitely learned something new here. And building a movement means getting people together, petitions, support groups. But, so going back to my point on coming out, it can be a coming out together rather than a coming out to the public. And that goes back to the Venn diagram in what is the public education circle and what is the direct services circle. So the direct services circle, of course, encompasses support groups, community events, community centers, and coming out can happen in those spaces, as well as coming out to the public that we know of, sort of Laverne Cox coming out to the public, coming out. And this tension doesn't have to be there. Yes, it's good to have a tension so that we understand the politics of coming out, but there's no need to force people to come out. There's no need to shout at people who are coming out, and to show that there are different strategies to attacking the same issue. How many minutes do I have left? 5? Okay, very good.
And 16,000 slides.
And no. Do people know this thing? I don't know why it's here in the sequence, but it's here because it's very interesting. I met Congressman David Cicilline. He is a gay congressman who's the congressman of Rhode Island, which is a predominantly Catholic state, but very LGBT friendly. So how he navigates that is that we shouldn't argue on positions. We should argue on interest or shared values. But most of the time what we're doing is arguing on positions, right? I'm pro-LGBT, you're anti-LGBT, and we argue. You should be pro, you should be anti, you should, no, okay, so that doesn't work, right?